Good morning. This is Ron. Welcome to Story Time. Today we're going to go ahead and do part 2 of chapter 3 of The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And part 2 is use smoke screens to disguise your actions. Deception is always the best strategy, but the best deceptions require a screen of smoke to distract people's attention from your real purpose. The bland exterior, like the unreadable poker face, is often the perfect smoke screen, hiding your intentions behind the comfortable and familiar. If you lead the sucker down a familiar path, he won't catch on when you lead him into a trap. Observance of the law, number 1. In 1910, a Mr. Sam Giesel of Chicago sold his warehouse business for close to $1 million. He settled down to semi-retirement in the managing of his many properties, but deep inside he itched for the old days of deal-making. One day, a young man named Joseph Wheel visited his office, wanting to buy an apartment he had up for sale. Giesel explained the terms. The price was $8,000, but he only required a down payment of $2,000. Wheel said he would sleep on it, but he came back the following day and offered to pay the full $8,000 in cash, if Giesel could wait a couple of days until a deal Wheel was working on came through. Even in semi-retirement, a clever businessman like Giesel was curious as to how Wheel would be able to come up with so much cash, roughly $150,000 today, so quickly. Wheel seemed reluctant to say and quickly changed the subject, but Giesel was persistent. Finally, after assurances of confidentiality, Wheel told Giesel the following story. Wheel's uncle was the secretary to a coterie of multi-million-dollar financiers. These wealthy gentlemen had purchased a hunting lodge in Michigan 10 years ago at a cheap price. They had not used the lodge for a few years, so they had decided to sell it and asked Wheel's uncle to get whatever they could for it. For reasons, good reasons of his own, the uncle had been nursing a grudge against the millionaires for years. This was his chance to get back at them. He would sell the property for $35,000 to a setup man, whom it was Wheel's job to find. The financiers were too wealthy to worry about this low price. The setup man would then turn around and sell the property again for its real price, around $155,000. The uncle, Wheel, and the third man would split the profits from this second sale. It was all legal and for a good cause. The uncle's just retribution. Giesel had heard enough. He wanted to be the setup buyer. Wheel was reluctant to involve him, but Giesel would not back down. The idea of a large profit plus a little adventure had him champing at the bit. Wheel explained that Giesel would have to put up the $35,000 in cash to bring the deal off. Giesel, a millionaire, said he could get the money with a snap of his fingers. While Wheel finally relented and agreed to arrange a meeting between the uncle, Giesel, and the financiers in the town of Galesburg, Illinois. On the train ride to Galesburg, Giesel met the uncle, an impressive man with whom he avidly discussed business. Wheel also brought along a companion, a somewhat paunchy man named George Cross. Wheel explained to Giesel that he himself was a boxing trainer, that Gross was one of the most promising prize fighters he trained, and that he had asked Gross to come along to make sure the fighter stayed in shape. For a promising fighter, Gross was unimpressive looking. He had gray hair and a beer belly. But Giesel was so excited about the deal that he didn't really think about the man's flabby appearance. Once in Galesburg, Wheel and his uncle went to fetch the financiers while Giesel waited in a hotel room with Gross, who promptly put on his boxing trunks. As Giesel half-watched, Gross began to shadow box. Distracted as he was, Giesel ignored how badly the boxer wheezed after a few minutes of exercise, although his style seemed real enough. An hour later, Wheel and his uncle reappeared with the financiers, an impressive, intimidating group of men, all wearing fancy suits. The meeting went well, and the financiers agreed to sell the lodge to Giesel, who had already had the $35,000 wired to a local bank. The minor business now settled, the financiers sat back in their chairs and began to banter about high finance, throwing out the name J.P. Morgan as if they knew the man. Finally, one of them noticed the boxer in the corner of the room. Wheel explained what he was doing there. The financier countered that he too had a boxer in his entourage, whom he named. Wheel laughed brazenly and exclaimed that his man could easily knock out their man. Conversation escalated into argument. In the heat of passion, Wheel challenged the men to a bet. The financiers eagerly agreed and left to get their man ready for a fight the next day. As soon as they had left, the uncle yelled at Wheel right in front of Giesel. They did not have enough money to bet with, and once the financiers discovered this, the uncle would be fired. Wheel apologized for getting him in this mess, but he had a plan. He knew the other boxer well, and with a little bribe, they could fix the fight. But where would the money come from for the bet? The uncle replied. Without it, they were as good as dead. Finally, Giesel had heard enough. Unwilling to jeopardize his deal with any ill will, he offered his own $35,000 cash for part of the bet. Even if he lost that, he would wire for more money and still make a profit on the sale of the lodge. The uncle and nephew thanked him. With their own $15,000 and Giesel's $35,000, they would manage to have enough for the bet. That evening, as Giesel watched the two boxers rehearse the fix in the hotel room, his mind reeled at the killing he was going to make from both the boxing match and the sale of the lodge. The fight took place in a gym the next day. Wheel handled the cash, which was placed for security in a locked box. Everything was proceeding as planned in the hotel room. The financiers were looking glum at how badly their fighter was doing, and Giesel was dreaming about the easy money he was about to make. Then, suddenly, a wild swing by the financiers' fighter hit Gross hard in the face, knocking him down. When he hit the canvas, blood spurted from his mouth. He coughed and then lay still. One of the financiers, a former doctor, checked his pulse. He was dead. The millionaires panicked. Everyone had to get out before the police arrived. They would all be charged with murder. Terrified, Giesel hightailed it out of the gym and back to Chicago, leaving behind his $35,000, which he was only too glad to forget, for it seemed a small price to pay to avoid being implicated in a crime. He never wanted to see Wheel or any of the others again. After Giesel scurried out, Gross stood up under his own steam. The blood that had spurted from his mouth came from a ball filled with chicken blood and hot water that he'd hidden in his cheek. The whole affair had been masterminded by Wheel, better known as the Yellow Kid, one of the most creative con artists in history. Wheel split the $35,000 the financiers and the boxers, all fellow con artists, a nice little profit for a few days' work. Interpretation. The Yellow Kid had staked out Giesel as the perfect sucker long before he set up the con. He knew the boxing match scam would be the perfect ruse to separate Giesel from his money quickly and definitively. But he also knew that if he had begun by trying to interest Giesel in the boxing match, he would have failed miserably. He had to conceal his intentions and switch attention, create a smokescreen, in this case the sale of the lodge. On the train ride and in the hotel room, Giesel's mind must be completely occupied with the pending deal, the easy money, the chance to hobnob with wealthy men. He had failed to notice that Gross was out of shape and middle-aged at best. Such is the distracting power of a smokescreen. Engrossed in the business deal, Giesel's attention was easily diverted to the boxing match, but only at a point when it was already too late for him to notice the details that would have given Gross away. The match, after all, now depended on a bribe rather than on the boxer's physical condition, and Giesel was so distracted at the end by an illusion of the boxer's death that he completely forgot about his money. Learn from the Yellow Kid. The familiar, inconspicuous front is the perfect smokescreen. Approach your mark with an idea that seems ordinary enough, a business deal, financial intrigue. The sucker's mind is distracted, his suspicions allayed. That is when you gently guide him onto the second path, the slippery slope down which he slides helplessly into your trap. Excuse me. And that is the end of the second part of Chapter 3, or Law 3. And next up is going to be Law 4, always say less than necessary. When you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear, and the less in control. Even if you are saying something banal, it will seem original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. So thank you very much for listening. This is Ron, and this has been Story Time. The next episode will be on Thursday, May 11th. And one last note: I haven't podcast for a couple of weeks because I was all of a sudden taken ill and ended up in the hospital and having surgery. So I'm recuperating still, but looking to make a full recovery. And but anyways, we're back on track with the podcasting, and I'll have another episode again on Thursday, the 11th. Thanks for listening.